And today's session is going to be all about how to write a great grant application. Now, I'm sure that many of you have, really keen to find out tips and new ideas for writing a great grant application. And I suppose the first thing is knowing where on earth you start to write your grant application. There's so much, it can be quite bewildering at times. So where do you actually start? And also, because grant applications can take so long to write as well, how on earth, how actually being able to write something that will give you the best chance of success is very important, so that it's not wasted time. And knowing what you need to include in your application as well is so important, so that you don't write all of the wrong information and waste time again. So what do you actually need to do as well before you begin? You know that you've got to know the right things to include, you know you've got to look in the right places, but there are things that you also need to know before you start. And one of those is that you may actually need permission to carry out your project. You may need faculty permission, you may need List B permission from the Archdeacon or faculty permission from the DAC. So think about that as well before you start your application. Have you got that permission? Do you need it? Because funders will actually require you quite often to provide that evidence of your permissions as you apply. And the other thing that you need to think about as well is, have you actually thought about the need for your project? What is the need for your project? Is it you that thinks there's a need, or have you been able to gather evidence that there is a need for your project to take place? Now, that gathering of evidence is really important. I mean, it could be that you need attendance figures, for instance, or you need to have carried out a survey with your congregation or your community. You might need letters of support, or perhaps even a professional report, such as a quinquennial inspection report. All of these things you might need to gather so that you can present that to the funder as part of your application. The other thing as well is, who are the people that will benefit from your project? That evidence you need to gather as well to present to the funder. Now, it may be that obviously your worshipping community are obvious people that are going to benefit, but there is also funding available quite often for other minority groups within the community, such as disadvantaged people, disabled people, the elderly. These are all people that, can benefit from your project, and being able to demonstrate the need for those people to be involved in your project is going to actually benefit those people, is something that is really useful to do for the funder as well. The funders want to see that their money is going to have a real benefit to people. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is, when you're thinking about your project and when you're looking at funders, think about the outcome of your project rather than the outputs. Now, there is a difference between outcomes and outputs, and I'm going to explain that to you later on in the presentation. But I suppose in simple terms, it's thinking about who will benefit from your project and how will they benefit. Will the community benefit from maybe improvement to existing facilities? Will the community benefit maybe if you add an extra facility such as a cafe? And will your heritage of your church or the architecture of your church, will that benefit future generations if you're able to preserve it? These are things that you can think about in terms of benefit. And funders will want to see that, and that you're demonstrating that. They don't want to see that their money is just going to go down a big drain. They want to see that your project will continue in the long term and will also be self-sustaining. So as much as you can in your application, think about, before you start your application, how people will benefit from the increased investment that will come from the grant funder. So where to actually look for your grants? There's so many places to look, and it's good to have some knowledge of where really good resources are. And one of the new resources that the Diocese of Leeds has recently subscribed to is a new grants portal called Funding for Communities. Now it says here on the slide, Dioceses of Chester and Manchester for community. In fact, this is quite an old slide, this one. Well, it's a few months old. And now the portal has Diocese of Leeds on there as well. And this is the homepage of the portal. And you can use it for free by logging in or registering on the portal page itself. Now, the portal has thousands of grants on there that are regularly updated by the organisation that run this database. And it will contain national and local funders that would be of interest to you. And it is for use by all parishes across the diocese. And we will provide training on how to actually use the portal. Now, Becky, my colleague, and I have already run some training courses on using the grants portal. And there is a recorded webinar already available on our website. But you can also come to myself or Becky and ask for a one-to-one session on how to use the portal if you want to search for a specific grant. Now, the great thing about this portal as well is that you can actually search for specific grants. You can narrow down your search categories so that you can find specific grants that might be relevant to your project, and you can save your searches and then investigate the funders in more detail. So please do have a look at that portal, register for it, play around with it, come to us if you need more help in using it. Another good place to look that my colleagues and I always send to people when they're looking for grants is the Charitable Grants for Churches list. This is quite a large document now. It's about 70 or 80 pages long, and it includes a lot of national funders. You won't find any local funding opportunities in there. They tend to be national funders. And you can download the list. You don't have to print it out now. You can download it as a document from Parish Resources. And on there, you will find that the grant funders are split up into these very helpful categories. So if you're looking for grants to help with maybe community projects or improving facilities, you'll find the grants in this category. Now, I understand that this particular document was last updated in July 2020, although there is a section on environmental projects now, which was updated at the beginning of this year. So you might find that some of the information looks a little bit out of date, but there are a lot of funders in there to look through. It's a really uncomplicated place to start. And of course, in Yorkshire, there's the Yorkshire Historic Churches Trust that you can apply to. This charity will actually help all Christian denominations throughout Yorkshire. The grants tend to be centred and focused around maintenance works and repair projects on the building fabric, on the church building fabric, rather than social action projects. I will also say as well that they do expect you to have applied to other funders as well. So like lots of funders, they won't give you all of the money that you need for the project. They will give you some matching funding, and they will be glad to see that you're applying to other funders as well. And then if you're within the Wakefield and Huddersfield episcopal areas, there's a Bishop's Development Fund that you can look at. The particular fund will help you with funding towards developing new mission projects, which might be around attracting more young people to your congregation, or any community outreach projects that you think would benefit the wider community, but also projects that will help you to grow your congregation. And then the Families and Social Family Social and Welfare Council Trust will also help to fund projects where you are actually teaching and promoting the basic principles of Christian behaviour and guidance, moral guidance. So again, there are some contact details there of who to contact for more information on those grants. And if you're in the Harrogate area, I'm sure you might have heard of the Harrogate Churches Repair Fund. This is quite a small focused fund that is only eligible for churches who are within a 7-mile radius of the Harrogate War Memorial. However, you can still apply for £1,000 a year if you're eligible. So that is another specific grant for churches in the Harrogate area. And then if you're in the Leeds area, there's the Leeds Church Extension Society, which tends to give funding to provide support to clergy, stipends, but also to help you with funding towards reordering your churches and church halls. So really good place to look. And I'm hoping that most of you will have heard of the Diocese of Leeds Church Building Grants. This is a scheme that our own diocese started last year, and it's going to run for the next 4 years. We have about £80,000 a year to give away in grants for projects that are around work on the church building fabric itself. Last year we had 61 applications for funding, and we awarded 51 grants. So I think if you do the maths there, you can see that we couldn't possibly have awarded £5,000 per parish. In fact, our grants were around about £2,000 maximum, but it's still, a really helpful grant to have. It's a very easy application form to fill in. And in particular, we like to encourage projects from parishes that are around improving the environmental, reducing the environmental impact of your church building, reducing your carbon footprint, perhaps by improving your heating system, lighting improvements, that sort of thing. So do please think about applying for one of these grants. The next deadline is the 30th of June, so that's this Thursday. And then after that, it's October, 31st of October. And last but not least, where to look for grants, more local grants that might fund more of social interaction projects or social benefit projects, are your community foundations. And if you click on this link, it will actually take you to a page where you can put in your postcode, and it will let you know what are the local community foundations that you can apply to. So again, they tend to be more focused on social benefit projects rather than building projects themselves. So I've talked quite a lot there about where you can look. And I mentioned as well quite a lot about being eligible for the grants that you're applying for. Now, it is really important to make sure that when you're applying for a grant, that you've checked the eligibility criteria. This will give you a best chance of success, because of all the grant applications received, the statistics show that 2/3 are actually ineligible to receive funding because they don't actually fit the funding criteria. So it's really important to check that you fit that criteria. Because they take so long to prepare these applications, you don't want to waste your time and then find that you were ineligible in the first place and you've been rejected. The Director of Social Change, for instance, calculated that 7 years of wasted effort was spent on writing applications to the wrong funders in 2010. So you don't want to fall into that category. Just some examples. Comic Relief actually reported that they'd received applications on behalf of an HIV project in Tanzania for a fund that operates only in Stoke-on-Trent. And the Big Lottery Fund has also received applications to fund installation of double glazing, would you believe, in houses. So, it does happen. do check the eligibility criteria and give yourself the best chance of success right at the very beginning. So when you're actually at that stage where you know you're eligible, and you've thought about what your project is, what are you going to actually include in the application? What's essential to include in your application? Well, you need to say who you are, and you need to say that very clearly to the funder. Assume that the funder won't know anything about you. And so what you're communicating right in the beginning of your application is who you are and what you're about. Sometimes with an application, you will get a prompt sheet with guidance about how you should fill in the application. But sometimes you'll get an application that is a free form application, and you'll just be invited to, write something about yourself. So it's quite a good idea to start off by maybe taking information about yourself. Maybe the wording from your website is good to use, or from your mission statement, for instance. And it's good to be able to write enough information that tells the funder who you are and what you do and what your mission is, without writing too much. The funder just needs to know where you are so that they can separate you out from all of the other applications that come across their desk. Well, here's an example of a good introduction. St Mary's is an active, lively Christian church seeking to worship God and be a centre of the community in Good Hill. A wide range of church services and activities are of particular interest to families with children, and we have a number of weekly activities that take place in the church, etc., etc. And a really good thing to include as well is, if you're trying to demonstrate, how active your church is, maybe include some figures there. And this is an example showing your average weekly attendance and how it's increased over the years, so that the funders get some sort of idea that you're vibrant and you're trying hard to increase your community engagement. So what else do you need to include in your application, apart from saying who you are? Well, you need to say what your project is, and you need to say that quite clearly as well. Now, here's an example of a project, which is a toilet refurbishment, which will bring the facilities up to date with current health and safety standards. Now, that says what the project is going to do. That is your project, but it doesn't really say enough. When you're explaining what your project is, don't just say what your project is, say how your project will benefit people. And this is touching on what the outcomes are for your project. So you can see that this example here is saying that this new disabled toilet facility is there to provide inclusive facilities for people, and also to increase the number of families and young children, vulnerable or disabled people, that can participate in the church. So what you're doing there is you're giving the funder more information, not just about what the project is, but how it is going to benefit people. Another example of what you need to include in your application is to clearly say why your project is important. Remember to say what the need is for your project. Now, the toilets, the example here goes on to say the toilets currently are not adequate for the people who use the church. So that does state, that they're not adequate, but that's not really enough. What you need to say is that the toilets are inadequate, and why they're inadequate. Because many of the groups that use the hall, there's considerable numbers who need to use the facilities, and the facilities that you have at the moment, they're not enough. There is a real need for new facilities. And it also goes on to explain that you're having to turn people away because you don't have the adequate disabled facilities. and that you already know that you would have new users coming along if you were able to offer those new facilities. So as well as saying that the toilets are not adequate, you've explained that there is a real need for those new facilities that will actually engage new people. And that's what the funder wants to see. And of course, you need to state clearly what the objectives are for your project. You want to improve the toilet facilities in the church hall, we know that. But you could expand on that to say a little bit more. You want to improve the toilet facilities by bringing them up to date with current health and safety standards. You want to improve facilities so that more people will come to church, and you want to provide that greater accessibility and inclusivity for all. So I hope you can see there that it's not enough just to say what your project is and what you want to achieve. It's really important to demonstrate what the need is and be able to provide some evidence for the need, and also try to explain what the benefits are for your project, what impact your project will have. Something else that the funder will definitely want to see in your application is how much your project will cost. So when you are actually drawing up your project details, you need to be thinking very clearly about the project cost and thinking about including every single thing that you think will have a cost in your project, so that the funder can actually see that and it's clearly broken down for them. Now, I would always say, please try to obtain quotes from accredited tradespeople, whoever you want to carry out the project work, or particular experts or specialists that you want to use. Provide those quotes as part of your application. I do receive lots of grant applications, for instance, at the moment for the Church Buildings Fund that the diocese runs. And quite often I don't receive any costs or any quotes, but people are still applying for the grant. And the funder needs to know what the project is going to cost right at the very beginning. They also want to see that you have tried really hard to be accurate with your budgeting, and that you've given a clear cost, you've broken it down, and you've been very clear about how much money you're asking the funder for as well. Remember that the funder won't be able to cover VAT, so think clearly about how you're going to cover those VAT costs. It may be that if your building is listed, you may be able to recover the VAT from the listed places of worship scheme. But if not, how are you going to meet those additional costs? The funder will want to see that information in your application. And when you're budgeting and working out the cost of your project, do remember to include a contingency amount as well, because often projects will cost more than you originally thought because of unforeseen circumstances. And the funder will be impressed if they see that you've worked through that budgeting and that you've got a contingency plan as well. And of course, be realistic about your project as well. When do you hope to carry out the work? How long will it take? And who is it you're approaching to actually carry out the work? The funder will want to see that you have some smart objectives there, that you're being realistic about the timescales for your project and for when you actually want the money. When do you need the money? At what part of your project do you need the money from the funder? So, of course, I've said as we've gone through, that funders are very unlikely to cover the full cost of your project. Most of them will just give you match funding. And so they will want to see where the rest of the funding is going to come from. So that means that they want to clearly see what your fundraising strategy actually is. So please do, in your application, be really honest and upfront about what other grant funding you've actually applied for. What other grants have you applied for? Don't be worried about saying that you have applied for other grants, because the funder will want to know that you've applied for other grants and see that you're working really hard to make this project work and attract additional funding. It may be that you have got a program of community events, fundraising events that you want to run. So tell that to the funder, explain what you're doing and how much you hope to raise as a result. Of course, you may have some restricted reserves that you can use on your project, or you may have some unrestricted reserves that you are willing to give a small amount of those unrestricted reserves towards funding for your project. So that's always a good thing to tell the funders, because again, it shows your commitment to the project. Again, you may be starting a gift appeal or applying to local authority for funding. Do say all of that in your application. And if you've approached some local companies, for instance, as well for sponsorship, that's always good to include as well. In the past, when I've applied for grants, I've found that the Cooperative Society have been very good at funding and giving local sponsorship. So do include all of that information, your fundraising strategy. And then I said earlier about the difference between the outcomes and the outputs. It is important to explain what the outcomes are for your project. What is the ongoing benefit? So what is the difference between the output and the outcome? Well, the output from, say, for instance, building a new accessible toilet will be that 10 churchgoers with disabilities and special needs have now got accessible facilities. So that's an actual output. It basically tells a story of what you've produced or what your organisation has been able to produce, just what you've done, basically. Whereas the outcome would go on to say that 10 people will be able to engage fully with the wide range of activities in the church, and that will lead to an increased sense of well-being and inclusivity. So the outcome there is really all about explaining what the impact and what the benefit and what the ongoing benefit is to the client, if you like, who's going to benefit from your project. So again, it's all about demonstrating the need and the impact of your project to the funder. You will find now in lots of grant funders' eligibility criteria, they will ask for evidence of sustainability and also expertise. So what does sustainability mean exactly? Well, your project will be sustainable if it's well managed and that you're able to demonstrate from evidence that you've collected that you will be able to continue with the outcomes of your project after that funder's money has run out. So for instance, if you've set up a cafe, for instance, in the church, you may have had the money to set up the cafe and to get it started, but can you show that it will be sustainable afterwards? Will that project continue being of benefit in the community afterwards? The funder really wants to know that you've thought about the sustainability of your project, because that money that they're investing, they want it to have a long-lasting impact. So have a think about sustainability before you start your project and how you can make it sustainable. I mean, that's just one example, the cafe. I mean, I'm thinking also, you know, maybe a social project, another social project where you might want sponsorship or membership going forward. Or if it's a church buildings project as well, where you're asking for money to do some essential repairs to the roof or to the guttering or whatever. But how are you going to show that you have got a rolling programme of repair continuing onwards that will continue to keep your church in good condition as time goes on? You want to be able to show the funder, that you are going to be looking after the building going forward. And perhaps maybe, quite a lot of funders will ask to see evidence of a maintenance program for your building, so that you can show that you're going to carry out regular maintenance, you're going to be investing money regularly in clearing the gutters, for instance, and that you're not going to have continued problems with the building, so that you're just going to keep pouring money into repairs. So that's another way that you can evidence sustainability. And of course, expertise as well. Funders will want to know that those people who are actually going to be working on your project, whether it's within your project team, within the church, or the contractors that you're going to engage with to carry out the project, that they have all got the necessary skills and specialisms that they need to carry out the particular project. Because the funders want to have confidence that their money will be spent in the best way possible. Okay, so I hope that all of what I've said already helps to give you more of an idea of the sorts of things that you need to be including in your grant application to get the best chance of success. And I said at the beginning as well that 2/3 of all applications fail because they don't fit the eligibility criteria right at the very beginning. Unfortunately, of those that do fit the criteria, only 40% of those are actually approved for funding. Disappointing, I know, but why is that? Some ideas. Sometimes the projects are poorly documented. The application doesn't say enough about the project and what it will achieve. And maybe provides too much information, and the funder just is overwhelmed by the amount of information. If you think that they're looking at maybe 40-50 applications per week, they want to have a clearly documented project which is very easy to read and the information is very accessible. It may as well be a reason for lack of success is that the project doesn't have a clear need and you haven't been able to demonstrate that need, and there's low interest in the project. And that may be because the project itself might be a vanity project and you've not actually been able to demonstrate that there is a need for that project. And I did go into that in a little bit of detail earlier. Another reason for lack of success is that it's clear to the funder that you haven't actually involved the client group who's in the planning of your project. Now, what I mean by that is, as an example, you may want to improve some of your access facilities in the church. But have you actually asked any disabled groups about whether what you're planning will actually work? Have you actually carried out an access audit, for instance? If you're having a cafe, running a cafe, have you actually spoken to the people who you expect to use it about what they'd like to see in the cafe? That's what I mean by involving people in the planning. So it's about community involvement. Your project's likely to have more chance of success if you do involve those people in the planning. I said earlier about the proposal, your application might be poorly written, hard to understand. Don't use buzzwords. I think you might have an edge if you use words like localism. That used to be used quite a lot, or big society was one of those phrases that was thrown around a lot. Don't use those in your applications. Use simple language. Don't confuse or rely on acronyms or whatever. Make sure that it's easy for the funders to read and that it's genuine as well. I mean, funders are looking at so many applications every week. As I said earlier, they want to, have an easy application to read. And it may be that check around and see what other projects, other churches are doing and close by. It may be that other local churches are applying for a similar project to what you're doing. And it may be that you could coordinate with them. Not always easy to do, I know, but If there's a lot of duplication with projects, with churches that are nearby, that's another reason why a funder might not fund you. Try not to be too ambitious with your objectives. I said about SMART objectives earlier. Be realistic about the timescale and about what you can achieve, and make sure that you've got enough evidence to demonstrate to the funder that the project can be carried out within the timescale. Another reason why you might not be successful is that you're not following the application guidelines. So make sure that if there is information there about eligibility and about how you should fill in your application form, do follow that and provide the evidence of sustainability. And also, if there is evaluation that you can carry out, make sure that you include that in your application as well. How will you evaluate your project, about its successes in the end? One of the best things I think you can do when you're about to apply for an application is to actually phone up the funder. A lot of people don't want to do that, but it's a good idea to phone them up, talk about your project, talk about how much, ask how much the funder might be able to contribute, and would they actually fund a project like yours. Ask them what kind of information they'd like to see. It's quite a good idea to try and establish that, that interaction with the funder before you start, and it might save you a lot of time. If the funder says, well, actually, I don't think we're going to be funding that type of project, and it will save you time right at the very beginning. So do ring them up. And if you are successful, afterwards, do send a thank you to the funder in writing, and then keep them informed of what you're doing as well. In fact, lots of funders will want to see ongoing evidence of your outcomes. The Big Lottery Fund, for instance, do expect quite a lot of feedback from you as you go through your project. I mean, even if you're not successful with your funding, do thank the funder for taking the time. I mean, you may not have been successful this time, but you may want to reapply later down the line. And so it's a good idea to, to give your thanks to the funder, and keep yourself in a good position for a future application. Evaluation, as I said, is an important thing. A lot of funders will expect you to actually monitor your project as you go through, and report back to them as well on maybe sending photographs or information about how well the project is going, that you're meeting and staying within your budget. So, do keep a record of what's happening, take pictures, questionnaires, that sort of thing, statistics, photos. Do all of that as you go along, and it gives you a better chance of evaluating your project. And you can say that in your application as well, what you intend to do to evaluate and monitor your project. Funders do like to see that. So that's where the presentation finishes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm hoping that you can all come back now